Hello and welcome to South2North, coming to you from the One Young World Summit in Johannesburg. I'm Haru Mitasa, standing in for Ridi Tlabi. Hello and welcome to South2North, coming to you from the One Young World Summit in Johannesburg. I'm Haru Mitasa, standing in for Ridi Tlabi, and today we're talking about media freedom. In today's high-tech world, each of us is capable of broadcasting a message to the whole world. Social media has changed the rules of journalism and news gathering forever. While newspaper sales decline, the popularity of online news sites, such as the Huffington Post, continues to grow. But is this new model truly free? Or is it just new players dictating the same game? Today, I'm joined by Arianna Huffington, co-founder of the Huffington Post, and James Chau, a journalist and media personality based in Beijing. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Arianna, you clearly must be doing something right with the Huffington Post. I mean, you won a Pulitzer Prize. Do you think that traditional journalism is dying?
Not at all. I think what we're seeing now is a kind of hybrid form of journalism, which is what I consider the Huffington Post to be, which is both a journalistic enterprise that does investigative journalism. I mean, the stories that we won a Pulitzer for were a 10-part investigative series on the lives of returning vets that took 9 months to do. So long-form journalism of the kind that we associate with very traditional media companies. But at the same time, we are a platform. And I love that just as much, the fact that we can have tens of thousands of bloggers, provided they meet a kind of quality standard. It doesn't matter who they are. They may be a homeless student, or they may be the president of France. And we love the fact that they can be next to each other. There is no hierarchy except having something to say. And we make a big effort that the conversation is civil. So we pre-moderate our comments. And because trolls have become increasingly ingenious in getting around our algorithms, we are now about to end anonymity. We are asking every commenter to have a verified identity.
James, you're into television for CCTV. Do you find TV journalism, traditional journalism, competing with online media in China?
I think yes, and I think also together with that parallel journey. Speaking to the example and the story of China, whether you're in Beijing or Shanghai or in a county or a village, the story of the people who live there is so vast and so different. But what I always remember is that a lot of people there are still living and still struggling. And so the television to them is not just their source of communication, their source of ideas. It provides them with a space, and I think it also gives them hope in the way that magazines do and did for many people. I think what's important, though, is that it's still the bedrock in China. A lot of people don't have stable electricity supplies, don't have access to computers, wouldn't even know how to use it if you put one in their hand. The mobile phone is breaking the barriers, but I think the television is still at the root, together with this amazing emergence of online journalism, where different people can take part in different ways in an emerging conversation.
How does censorship work in China then?
Well, I think speaking to my own personal story, I've been there for a decade now, and for me, and I'm not sure it's the same for everybody, I haven't been asked personally to change something, to drop a story. I think it's also to do with trust. That when you work well with your managers and your supervisors and you show them why you do what you do. I think I'm living proof, though, as not only a journalist, but as an AIDS activist who can anchor on the news, mainstream, in the evening, very publicly, and bring my stories also onto all the programs, is testament to the fact that things do progress and that things are in flux. You mentioned hybrid media. I would also say influx, because we're changing in so many different ways, and the tree that is media has so many branches, and I think the digital landscape has begun to be flung open. We have a microblog platform called Weibo, and because journalism, what is a journalist? Someone who went to university and got a degree, or someone who has access to an iPhone and can tap out 100 and something characters? They're able to tell their story. So when they're able to do that, naturally that puts pressure on established media to meet that. People realistically have more than one source of information now. And if you don't tell the complete story, people are going to know.
Does it mean that we're truly free, though, to say whatever we want to say on these new platforms? Or are we still limited or restricted?
Well, it's different. I mean, in the West, we are free. In the United States, you can say whatever you want in these platforms. Even hate-filled language, which is what trolls seem to specialize in. In the UK, we had the recent examples of rape threats and death threats against women, and all that is allowed to exist. I think companies can decide, Twitter, Google, the Huffington Post, what ground rules they want to impose, but they're not being imposed by government.
Is the reason why social media or online media is enticing to people, part of it is because you can be anonymous if you want to? Do you think that also helps people speak out more?
I think really there are some cases, like if you're a whistleblower, where anonymity is important. Certainly at the Huffington Post, we're going to protect that. They would be able to let us know their identity backstage, but not reveal it to the public if there is a legitimate reason. But I think social media can be incredibly important, and it can also be dangerous. Because hyperconnectivity is a danger. If we're connected 24/7, we are disconnected from ourselves. So that's why we started this whole editorial initiative that we are calling the third metric, to redefine success beyond money and power, which are the two metrics, to include, our well-being, our wisdom, our capacity to connect with ourselves. And that often means getting disconnected from our smartphones.
And I see you shaking your head. Do you agree?
No, I'm nodding in agreement. I think the money and power being the pillars of the way that we've been lived and been held up to be the pillars of measuring success for so long. And being in Asia and working and living in Asia, that's a disturbing picture if those continue to be the two pillars. I read what you said. You said you have two pillars. It's like balancing precarious on a two-legged stool. You do need a third. And apart from the sleep and the restfulness and the recharging and the renewing of oneself, I would also say values. Where does that come in? Values in oneself has to be the grounding. And then you can talk about values in new journalism. Do we need to revolutionize and be the architects of a completely new value system? Or can we simply apply the old ones to now? I don't think so. That's just a personal opinion. I think somehow we need to do that because we have challenges, like Arianna said, the trolls, where you're seeing women and men and children who are being victimized and people who are leveraging the anonymity privilege. It is a privilege still.
Yes.
To attack. And that was not the original intention of providing the anonymity choice.
Mm-hmm. How can we get more people involved? For example, your Huffington Post, how can we spread this to communities where they don't have access to things other people do have, like in the West or affluent societies in China, for example? How can we spread this model around?
Well, what is wonderful now is that 3 billion new people are going to come online in the next few years. And as James said, more and more people may not have a laptop, but they're going to have a smartphone. And so a lot of digital media is moving to mobile. I mean, mobile is a big priority for us, and a lot of our content is consumed on mobile devices, not on desktops. So that means making sure that whatever you program for mobile also, because video is consumed differently on mobile. It's a two-way conversation. It's not just our reporters and our editors writing. It's also being a platform for people to tell their stories. And my favorite story recently is a mother who had her own blog, wrote a beautiful blog post about the day she stopped saying, "Hurry up," to my daughter. She had a 6-year-old daughter. And she writes in that blog, she realized that the two words that she spoke most often to her 6-year-old, that person she loved more than anyone in the world, were hurry up and have your breakfast, hurry up and go to school, hurry up and go to bed, hurry up and go to sleep. And one morning she realized what she was doing to her child. And she stopped saying it. And we cross-posted this with her permission on the Huffington Post, and it became a viral sensation with over 1 million likes on Facebook and over 7 million people reading it, and she got a book deal. And I love these stories because it shows if you have something meaningful to say, it doesn't matter who you are.
You can just say it.
You can just say it, and then people resonate to it, and it has a big impact.
Let's talk more about the ethics of all of this. I mean, if people are allowed to say what they want to say online or wherever without saying who they are, how do you monitor what goes out there, what's right, what's not? You know, ethical journalism. How do we control that?
Well, as I said, there have to be protections for whistleblowers, for people who are speaking truth to power, exposing corruption at risk to their own safety or livelihood. And that we are going to maintain. But trolls who simply want to hide behind anonymity to indulge in ad hominem attacks basically is poisonous, and there's no reason for us to allow that, because we want to have a civil conversation. The Huffington Post has had almost 300 million comments since we launched. So if we have an incredibly active community, and we treasure that, and if you come on a site and there are all these nasty comments, you don't want to participate.
What do you think about that?
I think that needs to be supported by the rule of law. I think that also needs to be inclusive of the opinions of civil society. I think that this is a global conversation that the UK, the US, China particularly is having as home to one of the fastest growing countries in terms of internet penetration. I worry because the comments, the very nasty comments that we all are very well aware of, is simply an articulation of a skewed value system within that self. So again, why don't we come back and address the value system in a person so they wouldn't even have to write this online or not? It would articulate itself in different ways.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's often a mental health problem, but the question is, how do you reach that person? Incidentally, I don't think anonymity should ever be ended by the government, because that has many, many additional problems in terms of free speech. But I think each individual media provider can make that decision.
By blocking them, for example?
Yes.
Isn't it?
Unless they verify their identity.
Okay. Do you think, both of you, do you think the internet is the great equaliser, or is it still a few people telling the world how things should be done?
Well, I think it's become very democratic in a way, especially in large countries that may be more centrally controlled. That in a country like China, or even in a region like Asia, we all have black hair, we all have the same shade of skin, we all have deep, beautiful brown eyes. And you saw it with a blog, and now you see it with a microblog, and now you see it with phone apps, that has given them a platform to express themselves as individuals and to say that I, as an individual, also have a voice, no matter what you say or not. So I think, in a way, it has been a great equalizer. However, in terms of journalism, I think that's a different.
Exactly, that's what I want to ask. I mean, each organization has its own editorial policy. I mean, Arianna, if I wrote something that you didn't like and I want it published, but you don't like what I've written, how would you handle that?
No problem at all. We would publish it, provided you were civil in what you said and factual.
But aren't we all dictated to by masters, or people behind the scenes telling journalists what to do, what to write, what to say?
No, not necessarily at all. I mean, we are completely independent. We don't cheerlead for either political party. I mean, we have progressive values, but we have been very critical of President Obama in many instances, like his austerity policies, his staying in Afghanistan. So we don't simply mindlessly support a candidate or a political party. In fact, we have something that we call being beyond left and right. I think looking at everything as a left-right issue is missing the point. A lot of the major challenges that we're facing, this morning we talked about the challenge of youth unemployment, are not left-right issues. I mean, whether you're on the right or on the left, you must realize that having that level of youth unemployment, whether in South Africa or in Spain or in Greece, is so disastrous for the economy and for civil order.
Let's talk money. If we were to implement something like the Huffington Post, I mean, how could we make it work on a continent like Africa, for example? Because you need lots of money.
Shall we do it?
Yes, let's do it. Tell me how we can do it.
The Huffington Post now has a template, of technology, of how we work editorially. So we have found it very easy to launch the Huffington Post in other countries. With the exception of the UK and Canada, where we've launched by ourselves, we've launched with media partners. Like in France, we launched with Le Monde, in Spain with El País, in Japan with the Asahi newspapers, and there are 50-50 joint venture partnerships. And basically, we hire together jointly the journalists who are going to run the Huffington Post in that country. It's completely rooted in the country's culture. In Japan, actually, the editor-in-chief doesn't even speak English, so when he and I speak, we have to have a translator. But the great thing about that is that it's like having a global media presence, because when something happens in one country, like they're choosing the Pope in Rome, we have all the journalists on the ground who can cover it, and then we can translate it into the other languages. And the same goes with blogs. If we have François Hollande, the president of France, blog on the French site, we can translate and have it available to all the other sites.
James, do you think this could work elsewhere in the developing world in particular?
The media is constantly evolving and really going through some major dynamic shifts. For example, the traditional sources of advertising revenue are not there as they once were for the newspapers, for the television. But you get philanthropists, for example, like Graham Wood going to a JV with the British Guardian newspaper in Australia. And you have China and state television. And I suspect that each party will be looking at the other and seeing what could work for them.
But if advertising is so crucial, is there a danger that traditional media could collapse if they don't get the advertisers? Because advertisers will go to online media.
There are going to be fewer newspapers, but the newspapers that have adopted best are going to survive forever. A lot of newspapers, like the New York Times, like the Guardian, have done great work online. Their journalists blog, they use social media. So it's no longer like these two separate worlds of old media and new media. New media, like the Huffington Post, is doing investigative journalism. Old media is using social media and blogging and has a presence online. So there's a real convergence happening between the two.
We seem to live in a society where it's about the latest pop star, the latest this, the latest that. People seem to want to read that. Does that affect the way we do our work as journalists? That we now have to focus more on that kind of news and not on the serious stuff? And also advertisers will spend more money on celebrity news and not necessarily on real news. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I sometimes read through those magazines too.
We all do.
We all do we?
Yes,
we do, but you find yourself in them, don't you?
Well, I actually find, as the editor of the Huffington Post, that we cover everything. The third column on the Huffington Post is reserved for light news, entertainment, celebrity, as well as cultural and lifestyle. If you don't want to read them, you don't have to click on them. We are not your parents, It's like...
I would extend that and even go forward and say in a country like China, it's not about anymore the news that we want to give you. It's the news that the people want themselves. You talked about the master. I think it's the masters. The people, not just the people of the 1.3 billion, but the 75 million unique visitors that you have in every single part and corner and nook and cranny of the world. They are demanding news, whether it be about Justin Bieber or Syria.
But how do the people know that what they're reading is true? It's fact, it's verifiable information.
I can guarantee you that a lot of stuff that you'll read about me and you and everybody else is not true.
Well, I think that's where media companies have a real responsibility to their readers, their viewers, and trust is such a precious commodity that if you lose your readers or viewers' trust, you're in real trouble. So, I mean, we have absolute rules around fact-checking, verification before anything is published. I always tell our reporters, being first and being wrong is just not something to aspire to. You know, better to be second or third or fourth and be right. And we're very careful about that, not just when it comes to celebrity news, but also when it comes to, you know, tragedies, disasters, when people rush to judgment or rush to announce who did it and often get it wrong. And also around celebrities to be protective of their children. Again, we have a rule that if it's a paparazzi picture taken not when the celebrity was on a red carpet with their children, we wouldn't run it.
But what about citizen journalists? Who's responsible for them?
I was actually going to say that this is the beauty, though, of citizen journalism, that it does hold the previous few masters, or probably the few men, who were dictating the media language, the media dialogue. For example, we saw the case of the guy who just happened to be wandering around the hospital where Kate Middleton was giving birth. And that picture, or that video, or that tweet, what was important was not that he was the first. The important part was that he was right. And the dozens of established media outside didn't get what he had. I do think that it holds people to accountability. It introduces a new form of transparency. I think it's about tweaking, and as you said, who's responsible for them? I don't know.
Well, ultimately, they're responsible. Everyone who uses social media or any journalist, they're accountable. And if they promote misinformation, they're very quickly corrected. You know, it's true that it's easier to put misinformation out there, but it's also really faster to correct it.
What happens, Arianna, though, when you put something out and it's out, it's in the domain, and when you pull it back and correct it, it's out already?
It's too late. The damage is done,
Yes, it's
isn't it?
out, but you know, once it's corrected and the correction gathers momentum, then the truth is out.
With so much going on in the world today, what role does media have to play?
Well, I think media has to play a very different role than it's been playing, as well as doing all the things that it does do, like holding the powers that be accountable, speaking truth to power, etc. The media has to put the spotlight on the good things, on what is working. That is a huge responsibility, and we are not doing a good enough job, because we have the opportunity to help good things scale, to help them replicate. And we need to approach that with as much seriousness and invest as many resources as we're investing in covering bad news.
James?
I was sitting on a train once in Sweden and someone said, I don't watch the news anymore because all I read is bad news and it pulls me down. I would say that, especially in Asia, where the media can add real value, not just in terms of information, but in terms of people's souls, is ideas. The space for ideas, great ideas, bad ideas, horrific ideas, ridiculous ideas. But often when you have many ridiculous ideas or bad ones, something of beauty can emerge if you choose it to be so. I think it's so important to wake up in the morning and to set your intention for the day, to be able to click on HuffPost or my channel's website and to be hopeful, to see something that inspires you, to see something that pushes through. The reality is that many of our lives are very difficult in many different and sometimes concealed ways. Maybe an article on your website or maybe a story that I give you on television won't change your reality, but for maybe a moment when you wake up, it sets your day on a nice and even ground, and you go forward over the next 24 hours with a bit of a smile.
That's very nice.
I love that. In
It's
fact,
very nice, isn't it?
In fact, you know, we have a dedicated good news section. It's called the good news section. It's one of our most popular sections. And actually people fair to share good news.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for coming on the show. And thank you to you for watching at home. Please tweet your questions, comments, and opinions to @AJ South2North or find us on Facebook. Do join me again next week on South2North. Until then, goodbye.